The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in a formation that stretched across millions of kilometers. Over 3,000 vessels moved together with perfect coordination. Battleships and carriers took their positions alongside hospital ships and supply transports. This was not an invasion force. This was a rescue mission on a scale the galaxy had never seen. Admiral Kevin Brooks stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Enduring Hope, and surveyed the devastation before him. Where the Grand Assembly had once orbited in majestic splendor, only debris remained. The swarm had reduced the greatest structure in the galaxy to scattered wreckage floating in the void. Commander Lisa Monroe, now captain of the Enduring Hope, approached with tactical reports. She had served beside Ambassador Carter on that final day when humanity walked away in silence. Now she had returned to help rebuild what the silence had broken. The swarm command vessels are holding position near the remnants of the assembly, Monroe reported. They seem uncertain how to respond to our arrival. Brooks nodded thoughtfully. They expected broken survivors, not a unified fleet. Signal all vessels. Execute Operation Shepherd. The battle that followed would be recorded in the histories of every species that survived to tell the tale. Human tactical coordination turned 3,000 independent ships into a single weapon of precise destruction. Squadrons moved in patterns that the swarm had never encountered. Attacks came from angles that their collective intelligence could not predict. The key was communication. Human commanders shared information instantly across the entire fleet. When one ship spotted a weakness, every ship knew within seconds. When a squadron took damage, support arrived before they could be overwhelmed. The chaos that had destroyed the Council fleet was replaced by harmony that the swarm could not match. In 3 decisive engagements over 12 hours, the swarm command vessels were destroyed. Without their coordination, the lesser creatures lost their purpose and scattered into the darkness from which they had come. The threat that had conquered a dozen worlds was broken by the species that the Council had dismissed as dismissed. Inferior, but the humans did not celebrate their victory. As soon as the last swarm vessel was confirmed destroyed, the warships withdrew and the relief vessels moved forward. Medical teams deployed to devastated worlds where survivors huddled in the ruins of their cities. Supply convoys delivered food to populations that had not eaten properly in months. Engineering crews began the long process of rebuilding infrastructure that had been damaged or destroyed. President Matthew Cole arrived at the site of the former Grand Assembly aboard a diplomatic vessel. He had insisted on coming personally despite the risks. This moment was too important to delegate. The survivors of the Council had gathered on a nearby station that had somehow escaped the destruction. Representatives from species that had once commanded the galaxy now waited with nervous anticipation. They did not know what humanity would demand in return for saving them. Cole walked into the makeshift assembly chamber alone and without guards. He wore a simple suit rather than formal robes. He carried no weapons and displayed no symbols of power. He stood before the gathered beings and spoke in a quiet voice that somehow filled the entire room. We are not here to conquer you. We are not here to rule you. We are not here because you deserve our help. He paused and looked at the faces around him. He saw fear and shame and confusion. He saw beings who had spent their entire lives believing they were superior to all others now confronting the reality of their dependence. We are here because this is who we choose to be. We choose to help those who suffer, even those who have wronged us. We choose to rebuild rather than revenge. We choose partnership over domination. Former High Arbiter Vuthel rose slowly from his seat. He had recovered some of his strength in human care, but would never again be the proud leader he once was. He spoke with a voice that trembled with emotion. On behalf of all Council species, I offer humanity our deepest apologies. We treated you terribly. We dismissed your contributions. We laughed at your departure. We have no right to ask for your forgiveness." Cole shook his head gently. "We do not need your apologies. The past cannot be changed. What matters now is the future. We propose the formation of a new galactic union based on true partnership. Every species will have an equal voice. No one will be dismissed or diminished. All will contribute according to their abilities and receive according to their needs." The chamber fell silent as the survivors absorbed this offer. They had expected punishment, demands, or at the very least stern conditions. Instead, they received an invitation to genuine equality. One by one, representatives rose to accept the proposal. Even species that had been the most hostile to humanity recognized that this was their only path forward. The Galactic Council that had governed through hierarchy and tradition was dead. Something new was being born in its place. Young Kethros had been chosen to represent the new Nethran government. He was barely an adult by his species' standards, but the old leaders had proven themselves unworthy. The young needed to build what the old had destroyed. He stood before the assembly and delivered the closing address. 2 years ago, a human nurse named Jenny Howard sat beside me when I was lost in grief. I asked her why humans helped those who hated them. Her answer was simple: "Because you needed help. That is reason enough." Kethros looked at the human delegation with tears in his ancient eyes. That answer taught me more about wisdom than all the archives of the old council. True strength is not the power to destroy your enemies. True strength is the courage to help them become something better. Humanity has shown us what we forgot over 3,000 years of ruling the galaxy. Kindness is not weakness. Compassion is not foolishness. Partnership is not submission. Ambassador Daniel Carter had come out of retirement for this moment. He sat in the human section and listened to the young Netherans speak words that made every sacrifice worth enduring. The years of insults and dismissals faded into insignificance. This was why humans kept trying, even when others gave up on them. The ceremony concluded with the signing of the new Union Charter. Every species added their mark to a document that promised equality, respect, and mutual support. The laughter that had once echoed through these halls was replaced by something far more valuable. Understanding. After the formal proceedings ended, Carter walked alone through the corridors of the station. He found himself standing before a window that looked out at the stars. A young voice interrupted his thoughts. "Ambassador Carter?" He turned to find Kethros approaching with hesitant steps. "I wanted to thank you," the young Nethran said. "You could have responded to our insults with anger. You could have demanded revenge when we needed your help. Instead, you just walked away in silence and let us learn the truth for ourselves." Carter smiled gently. "We never wanted to be superior to anyone. We just wanted to be partners. It took the galaxy falling apart to understand the difference." Kethros nodded slowly. "I think I finally understand. You did not leave because you were angry. You left because staying would have meant accepting being treated as less than you were." "Yes," Carter agreed. "And we came back because watching you suffer would have made us less than we wanted to be. Both choices were about who we are, not about who you are." The young Nethran considered this wisdom carefully. "Do you think the new union will be different? Do you think we can truly be partners this time?" Carter looked out at the stars that humanity had reached across to touch. "I think we will try. And when we fail, we will try again. That is all anyone can do. Keep trying to be better than we were yesterday." Outside the window, human vessels continued their work of healing and rebuilding. Doctors treated patients they had never met. Engineers repaired systems they had not built. Soldiers protected civilians who had once called them dangerous. None of them asked for thanks. None of them expected recognition. They simply did what humans had always done. They helped. And this time, the galaxy finally understood the gift it had been given. 2 years after humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council, a small damaged vessel appeared at the border of human space. It carried no weapons and broadcast no threats. Its only passenger was the being who had once ruled the galaxy. High Arbiter Verthal had escaped the fall of the Sar Prime, with nothing but the clothes on his back and the shame that weighed on his soul. His silver skin had turned gray with age and stress. His once proud posture had been under the weight of failure. He was no longer the leader of 200 species. He was simply an old man with nowhere else to go. The human border patrol vessel that intercepted him could have turned him away. They could have reminded him of the vote that had started this disaster. They could have taken satisfaction in seeing their greatest critic brought so low. Instead, they welcomed him aboard and treated his injuries. Admiral Kevin Brooks reviewed the report from his command center with mixed emotions. He had spent his entire career protecting beings who had never thanked him for his service. Now the leader of those beings sat in a human medical bay, receiving better care than he had any right to expect. "What are our orders regarding the former High Arbiter?" his executive officer asked. Brooks considered the question carefully. "Standard refugee protocols. Medical care, food, shelter, and dignity. Whatever he did before, he's a civilian in distress now." President Matthew Cole received word of Verthal's arrival within hours. Cole was a quiet man who had never sought power but had accepted it when his people asked him to lead. He understood that this moment would define humanity's character more than any battle or treaty. Requested a private meeting with the former High Arbiter, Verthal was brought to a simple conference room in the border station. No guards surrounded him. No chains bound his hands. He was offered a chair and a cup of tea and treated with the same courtesy that any guest would receive. President Cole entered alone and sat across from the being who had once dismissed humanity as an inferior species. "High Arbiter Verthal," Cole began. "I am no longer High Arbiter," Verthal interrupted. His voice was hollow. "I am nothing. The council has fallen. The assembly hall has been destroyed. Everything I spent my life building is gone." Cole nodded slowly. "I am sorry for your losses, truly." Verthal looked up with confusion in his ancient eyes. "Why? We treated your people terribly. We left when you left. We refused to see what was right in front of us until it was too late. Why would you be sorry for our suffering?" "Because suffering is suffering," Cole replied simply. "It does not become less painful just because the victim made mistakes. We did not help others because they deserve it. We help because they need it." Verthal stared at the human leader for a long moment. Then something broke inside him that had been holding together through sheer will. Tears began to fall from his eyes, something that Netherans almost never allowed themselves to do. "We were so arrogant," he whispered. "We thought we were the center of the galaxy. We thought everyone else existed to serve our interests. And you humans, you just kept helping us, even when we spat in your faces. Why? Why did you do it?" Cole leaned forward with genuine compassion in his expression. "Because helping others is not about them. It is about us. It is about who we choose to be. We left the council because staying would have required us to accept being treated as less than equals. We could not do that without becoming less than we were. But refusing to help those in need would make us less than we are too." Verthal wiped his eyes with shaking hands. "I do not understand your species. You are so young compared to us. You have existed for barely a blink of cosmic time. Yet you seem to understand things that we have forgotten. Perhaps that is why," Cole suggested gently. "You have been powerful for so long that you forgot what it felt like to be weak. We remember. Every human carries the memory of times when we needed help and did not receive it. We swore that we would never let others feel that same abandonment." The conversation continued for hours. Berthel spoke of his regrets, his failures, and his shame. Cole listened without judgment and offered no condemnation. When the meeting ended, Berthel was shown to comfortable quarters where he could rest and recover. Meanwhile, across human space, ordinary citizens are making their own choices. News of the Council's collapse had spread through human media. Stories of suffering and death filled every broadcast. Images of refugee ships crowded with starving beings touched hearts that politicians could never reach. Without any government order, humans began organizing relief efforts. Churches collected food and medicine. Schools raised funds for refugee housing. Factories converted their production lines to create emergency supplies. Volunteer groups formed by the thousands, all asking the same question: when can we start helping? A young Netheran orphan named Kethros had arrived at a human refugee center after watching his entire colony destroyed by the swarm. He was barely old enough to understand what had happened. He only knew that his parents were gone and the world no longer made sense. A human nurse named Jenny Howard found him sitting alone in a corner of the medical bay. He had refused to eat or speak since his arrival. Jenny sat down beside him and waited in silence. After a long time, Kethros finally spoke. "Why are you helping us? Your people hate us." Jenny shook her head gently. "We do not hate you. We were hurt by what your leaders did, but we do not hate ordinary people for the actions of their governments. My father said humans were dangerous. He said you would conquer the galaxy if no one stopped you." Jenny smiled sadly. "We never wanted to conquer anyone. We just wanted to help. Sometimes people fear those who help because accepting help makes them feel weak. But there is no shame in needing help. Everyone needs help sometimes." Kethros looked at her with eyes that were too old for his young face. "Why do you help those who hated you?" Jenny considered the question seriously before answering. "Because you needed help. That is reason enough." The young Netheran began to cry. Jenny held him gently and let him release the grief that had been trapped inside his small body. Around them, other refugees watched the scene with something shifting in their hearts. President Cole addressed the Human Federation Assembly that evening. He stood before the elected representatives of humanity and presented the choice that would define their future. "We can remain safe behind our borders," he said. "We can watch the galaxy burn and tell ourselves that we are not responsible. No one could blame us for that choice. We were rejected and humiliated by those we tried to help. We owe them nothing." He paused and looked out at the faces of his people. "Or we can remember who we are. We can remember that our worth is not determined by how others treat us, but by how we treat others. We can choose to help not because they deserve it, but because we refuse to become the kind of people who watch suffering and do nothing." The vote was called. Representatives from every human world cast their decision. When the counting was done, the result was nearly unanimous. Humanity would return to Council space, not as conquerors or saviors, but as partners offering a hand to those who had fallen. Admiral Brooks received his orders within hours. He was to mobilize the largest fleet in human history. The mission was not conquest. It was rescue. As his ships began their journey toward the shattered remains of the Council, Brooks allowed himself a small smile. This was what humanity had always been. Not warriors or rulers, but helpers. Not judges or executioners, but healers. The galaxy had tried to make them forget that truth. They had failed. 18 months after humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, the galaxy was burning. The Vethrak swarm had emerged from the darkness between stars with a fury that no living species had ever witnessed. They were not a single race, but a collective of consumed civilizations, their bodies twisted and merged into weapons of pure destruction. They did not negotiate. They did not demand surrender. They simply devoured everything in their path. The first council, world to fall, was Kelleran Prime. it had been home to 3 billion beings and had served as the primary agricultural hub for the surrounding systems. The Council fleet had responded to the distress call within hours, arriving with over 200 warships, ready for battle. The battle lasted less than a day. Without human tactical coordination, the Council fleet could not function as a unified force. Each species followed its own command structure and used its own communication protocols. Ships that should have supported each other instead got in each other's way. The Vethrak tore through the disorganized fleet like a blade through cloth. Only 17 vessels escaped to report the disaster. High Arbiter Verthal stood before the Grand Assembly with fear visible on his silver face. He had aged terribly in the past year and a half. The stress of watching everything he had built collapse around him had taken a terrible toll. His voice shook as he addressed the delegates. "We must unite our forces under a single command," he pleaded. "We must put aside our differences and work together as one." Delegate Cirrus rose from her platform with scales that had lost much of their blue shine. The Kethra Dominion was falling apart around her. Her anti-human policies had destroyed her people's economy. Now revolution was spreading through her homeworld as citizens blamed their government for the disaster. "The Kethra Dominion will not submit to foreign command," Cirrus declared with what little pride she had left. "We will defend ourselves, as we always have." "You have never defended yourselves," Councillor Mathai responded bitterly. "Humans defended you for 47 years while you mocked them behind their backs." The assembly erupted into shouting. Accusations flew between species that had once called each other allies. Old grudges resurfaced. New insults were added to ancient wounds. The council that had governed the galaxy for 3,000 years was tearing itself apart from within, while enemies gathered at the gates. Captain Gregory Walsh watched the chaos from his position aboard a human patrol vessel stationed at the border of human space. His orders were clear: observe and report. Do not engage. Do not interfere. Do not help. Walsh had served in the human navy for 20 years. He had fought pirates, rescued stranded vessels, and defended innocent lives regardless of species. Now he sat and watched as refugee ships gathered at the border of human space, fleeing the devastation that spread across Council territory. His communications officer approached with a troubled expression. "Captain, we're receiving distress calls from the civilian vessels. They're asking for permission to enter human space." Walsh looked at the sensor display. There were hundreds of ships out there. Some were proper spacecraft capable of interstellar travel. Others were converted cargo haulers, barely held together by desperate repairs. All of them were filled with beings who had nowhere else to go. "Contact Federation Border Command," Walsh ordered. "Request guidance on refugee protocols." The response came within an hour. Human space was open to refugees from Council territory. All vessels would be directed to processing stations where passengers would receive medical care, food, and temporary housing. No one would be turned away. Walsh felt something loosen in his chest. Whatever the Council had done, whatever insults they had hurled, humanity remained what it had always been. They would not become cruel simply because others had been cruel to them. The first refugee ship to enter human space was a damaged Kethra transport. Walsh watched it pass his position with a mixture of emotions he could not quite name. These were the same beings whose government had demanded human containment. Now they fled to humans for protection. Among the refugees was former Delegate Cirrus herself. She had escaped her home world just hours before the revolutionary forces had reached her residence. Her scales were dull, and her eyes held the broken look of someone who had lost everything. The human vessel that rescued her transport had treated her with the same courtesy they showed every other refugee when she arrived at the processing station. A human medical officer examined her injuries and gave her medication for her stress. A human aid worker showed her to temporary quarters and brought her food. No one mentioned her past actions. No one reminded her of the vote that had started this disaster. Cirrus sat alone in her small room and wept for the first time in her adult life. Back in council space, the situation grew worse by the day. 2 more systems had fallen to the swarm. The combined council fleet had been reduced to less than half its original strength. Economic collapse had spread from the outer systems to the core worlds. Starvation was returning to planets that had not known hunger in generations. High Arbiter Varthel sent message after message to the Human Federation. He apologized for past actions. He begged for assistance. He offered concessions that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. Every message was returned, unopened, with the same simple note: "Humanity wishes the Council well." Ambassador Lin Cho, the new Human Foreign Affairs Director, reviewed the latest batch of requests with a neutral expression. She was younger than her predecessor Daniel Carter, but possessed the same quiet strength that humans seem to carry naturally. "The Metheri are asking for medical supplies," her assistant reported. "The Varelians want agricultural specialists. The Thesans are requesting naval support against the pirates who now control their shipping lanes." Lin Cho nodded slowly. "Respond to each request with our standard message. We remain willing to negotiate with unified governments. Individual requests cannot be processed at this time. Ma'am, thousands of beings are dying every day. Perhaps we could make an exception in humanitarian cases." Lin Cho was quiet for a long moment. Her face betrayed nothing of the struggle inside her heart. She wanted to help. Every human wanted to help. It was in their nature to see suffering and try to end it. But she also remembered the lesson that the Council had taught humanity. Help given freely was help that was not valued. Kindness without boundaries became exploitation. The humans who had served Council species for decades had not been treated as partners. They had been treated as servants too foolish to demand fair treatment. "No exceptions," Lin Cho said finally. "Not until they learn that our help is a gift, not a right." The Grand Assembly Hall itself came under threat as the swarm advanced toward the Council capital. Emergency evacuation procedures were activated. Delegates who had laughed at humanity's departure now fled in panic through the same corridors that Ambassador Carter had walked in silence. 18 months before, Councilor Methe refused to evacuate. He was too old to run and too tired to care about his own survival. He sat in the empty assembly hall and composed one final message to his human contacts. "We were fools," he wrote. "We had the greatest friends the galaxy had ever known, and we threw them away because we were too proud to see their value. If you are reading this, please know that some of us understood too late. Some of us are sorry." He never received a response, but the message was received, and in the halls of human government, the debate about what to do next grew louder with every passing day. 6 months had passed since humanity walked out of the Grand Assembly Hall. In that time, the Galactic Council had continued its business without concern. Delegates made speeches about the wisdom of containing human expansion. News broadcasts across Council space celebrated the departure of the troublesome species that had always asked too many questions and demanded too much respect. On the Varelian homeworld, a different story was unfolding. Dr. Patricia Lang stood in the middle of her agricultural research station and watched her team pack the last of their equipment. She had spent 11 years on this dusty planet teaching the Varelians how to grow crops in their depleted soil. When she had arrived, 30% of the population faced starvation every winter. Now, that number had dropped to less than 5%. "Dr. Lang," said her assistant, a young man named Stephen Park, "the transport is ready. We need to leave within the hour." Patricia nodded, but did not move immediately. Outside the window, she could see Varelian farmers working in the field she had helped them create. They used techniques she had taught them and tools her team had designed specifically for their world. Most of them did not even know she was leaving. The Varelian government had not bothered to announce the human departure. Did the council send anyone to continue our work? Patricia asked. Stephen shook his head. No one has been assigned. The council agricultural department said they would review the situation in 6 months. Patricia closed her eyes. 6 months. The growing season would be over by then. Without proper guidance, the farmers would return to their old methods. The soil recovery program would stall. Within 2 years, the famine would return worse than before. She wanted to stay. Every part of her being screamed at her to ignore the withdrawal order and continue helping these people. But she also remembered the vote in the Grand Assembly. She remembered that not a single Varelian delegate had spoken in humanity's defense. The same government that had begged for help had stayed silent when her people were humiliated. Let's go, she said quietly. There's nothing more we can do here. Across council space, similar scenes played out on hundreds of worlds. Admiral Kevin Brooks sat in his command center aboard the carrier, steadfast hope, and reviewed the withdrawal reports. Human patrol vessels had protected the Thesan shipping lanes for 32 years. In that time, pirate attacks had dropped from an average of 200 per year to less than 10. The Thesans had grown so accustomed to safety that they had stopped maintaining their own defense fleet. Now the human ships were gone. Brooks read the latest intelligence report with a heavy heart. In the 3 months since the withdrawal, pirate attacks had increased to over 800. 15 cargo vessels had been destroyed. 2 passenger liners had been captured and their occupants sold into slavery. The Thesan government had sent urgent requests to the council for replacement patrol vessels. The council had promised to address the matter at their next quarterly session. Trade Minister Nathaniel Price reviewed the economic data from his office on Earth. The human currency had backed 40% of all galactic trade. Human merchant vessels had carried 60% of all goods moving between council worlds. Human banks had provided loans to developing species at rates far below what council institutions offered. All of that was ending. Price watched the numbers scroll across his screen. Prices for basic goods in council space had tripled in 4 months. Several smaller species had already defaulted on their debts. The great trading houses that had grown rich on human commerce were beginning to fail. Economic experts across the galaxy were starting to ask questions that no one wanted to answer. How had one species become so essential without anyone noticing? The answer was simple. Humans had never demanded recognition for their contributions. They had never held their assistants hostage for political gain. They had simply seen problems and solved them because solving problems was what humans did. The council had grown so accustomed to human help that they had stopped seeing it as help at all. They had started seeing it as their natural right. On the Metheri homeworld, hospitals reported shortages of critical medicines. Human pharmaceutical companies had been providing these drugs at cost for decades. Now those companies were focusing on human markets only. The Metheri government demanded that the council force humans to resume shipments. The council had no way to force humans to do anything. Counselor Methai was one of the few beings in the galaxy who understood what was happening. He was an elderly Varelian who had served on the council for over 60 years. He had watched humanity join the galactic community and had quietly admired their determination and generosity. He had wanted to speak in their defense during the vote, but had been warned by his government to remain silent. Now he sat in his private chambers and composed a message to the human delegation. He apologized for his cowardice. He explained that many council members privately regretted the vote, but were afraid to say so publicly. He asked if there was any way to repair the damage. The response came within a day. It was polite, respectful, and devastating. The Human Federation appreciates your kind words, Counselor Methai. However, all official communication with Council species must now go through proper diplomatic channels. As humanity is no longer a member of the Galactic Council, no such channels currently exist. We wish you well in your future endeavors. Mathai, read the message 3 times. The humans were not being cruel. They were not seeking revenge. They were simply following the logical consequences of the Council's decision. If humanity was not wanted as a partner, then humanity would not act as a partner. The Council held an emergency session to address the growing crisis. High Arbiter Verthal assured the delegates that the situation was temporary. The humans would eventually realize that they needed Council resources and protection. They would come back, humbled and willing to accept their proper place in the galactic order. We need only wait them out, Verthal declared. Human pride is strong, but human practicality is stronger. Give them a year, and they will be begging to return. The delegates applauded this wisdom and returned to their comfortable lives. None of them noticed the first reports coming from the galactic rim. Deep space sensors had detected unusual movement near the border of known space. Something was gathering out there in the darkness. Something large. Human early warning systems would have detected this threat 6 months ago. Human analysts would have recognized the patterns and sounded the alarm. Human strategists would have begun preparing defensive plans, but humans were no longer watching the Council's borders. They were no longer watching anything at all. Admiral Brooks reviewed the same sensor data from his position in human space. He recognized what was coming. The Vethrak swarm had returned. These creatures had nearly destroyed the galaxy once before, 3,000 years ago. Only the combined might of all species working together had stopped them. Brooks sent his report to Federation Command with a simple recommendation. This is not our problem anymore. Let the Council handle it. They wanted us gone. Now they have their wish. The report was filed, and no action was taken. Humanity had learned its lesson about helping those who did not want to be helped. In the darkness between stars, the swarm continued to grow. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest structure ever built by intelligent beings. It floated in orbit around the neutral world of the Sara Prime and held representatives from over 200 species. The hall was filled with floating platforms where delegates sat according to their importance. Humans sat near the back, as they always had for the past 47 years. Ambassador Daniel Carter adjusted his formal uniform and watched the proceedings with tired eyes. He had served in this position for 12 years and had learned to keep his face neutral, no matter what insults were thrown at humanity. Beside him sat Commander Lisa Monroe, the military attaché assigned to protect the human delegation. She was younger than Carter, but had the same weary expression that came from years of being treated as less than equal. The session had been going on for 6 hours. Various species had presented their concerns about trade routes, border disputes, and resource allocation. Not once had any delegate acknowledged the human contributions to solving these very problems. Carter remembered when human engineers had rebuilt the Thesan power grid after the Great Collapse. He remembered when human doctors had worked without sleep for months to stop the Vorn plague from spreading across 12 worlds. He remembered when human soldiers had held the line at Kalos Station while the Council fleet retreated to safety. None of that seemed to matter anymore. High Arbiter Verthal rose from his elevated platform at the center of the hall. He was a Netheran, a species known for their great height and silver skin. The Netherans had founded the Council 3,000 years ago and had never let anyone forget it. Verthal looked down at the assembly with the expression of a teacher addressing particularly slow students. We will now hear from Delegate Cirrus of the Kethra Dominion, Verthal announced in his deep voice. Carter felt Monroe tense beside him. The Kethra had never hidden their hatred for humanity. They believed that humans bred too quickly, expanded too aggressively, and asked too many questions. Delegate Cirrus was the worst of them all. She was a tall creature covered in blue scales, with eyes that held nothing but contempt whenever she looked at the human section. Cirrus glided to the speaking platform with practiced grace. "Honored members of the council," she began, "I bring before you a matter of galactic security. The human species has grown beyond acceptable limits. They now occupy 17 star systems and show no signs of slowing their expansion. Their population doubles every century. At this rate, they will outnumber all council species combined within 500 years. Murmurs spread through the assembly. Carter noticed that none of them sounded particularly concerned. Most sounded interested, even supportive. "I propose that we restrict human expansion to their current 3 core systems," Cirrus continued. "All other human colonies will be placed under council administration. Human military vessels will be limited to defensive purposes only and will require council approval for any deployment." Carter could not believe what he was hearing. Humanity had never started a war with any council species. They had only ever defended others and themselves. He looked around the hall, hoping to see someone rise in objection. The Varelians had been saved from famine by human agricultural specialists. The Thesans owed their shipping lanes to human patrol vessels that kept pirates away. The Metheries still used the medical technology that human researchers had freely shared with them. No. One spoke. High Arbiter Vothel nodded slowly. "The motion is presented. Does any delegation wish to speak in opposition?" Silence filled the great hall. 200 species sat in their comfortable platforms and said nothing. Carter felt something break inside his chest. It was not anger. He had expected anger, but found only a deep and profound sadness. 47 years of service, sacrifice, and friendship meant nothing to these beings. "The motion passes without opposition," Berthel declared. "The human delegation will have 30 standard days to begin compliance procedures." Carter stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate. Every eye in the hall turned to watch him. They expected shouting. They expected threats. They expected humans to react with the emotional outbursts that other species found so amusing and primitive. Carter straightened his uniform and spoke in a calm and clear voice. "The Human Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We thank you for 47 years of partnership and wish all member species well in their future endeavors." He turned and walked toward the exit. Monroe followed without a word. Behind them, the hall erupted in laughter. Several delegates made comments about humans being too sensitive. Others predicted that the humans would come crawling back within months once they realized how much they needed council resources and protection. The human delegation did not respond. They did not turn around. They did not slam doors or make dramatic gestures. They simply walked out in complete silence and boarded their transport vessel. Only when the ship had cleared the station did Monroe finally speak. "Sir, what happens now?" Carter looked out at the stars passing by. His face was calm, but his eyes held something that Monroe had never seen before. It was not hatred or anger. It was the look of someone who had finally accepted a painful truth. "Now we go home," Carter said quietly. "We withdraw every human from council space. Every doctor, every engineer, every soldier, every merchant. We bring them all home." Monroe considered this for a moment. "The council species have grown dependent on our support. Without our patrol vessels, the shipping lanes will become dangerous. Without our medical teams, the plague research will stop. Without our agricultural specialists, the Varelian food crisis will return." "Yes," Carter agreed. "They will. Should we not warn them? Give them time to prepare?" Carter turned to look at his young officer. There was no satisfaction in his expression, only weariness. "We have warned them for 47 years, Commander. We have told them again and again that partnership requires respect. We have shown them through our actions what we bring to this alliance. They chose not to see it. The transport ship jumped to faster than light speed, leaving council space behind. In the Grand Assembly Hall, the laughter continued. High Arbiter Varthol accepted congratulations from Delegate Cirrus on finally putting the humans in their place. Other delegates discussed how to divide up the human colonies that would soon fall under council control. None of them noticed that the human seats were already being removed from the hall. None of them wondered what would happen when the beings who had quietly held their civilization together simply stopped holding. Carter sat alone in his quarters and composed a message to the Federation president. He reported what had happened and recommended immediate and complete withdrawal from all council activities. At the end of the message, he added a personal note. They have no idea what they have just done. By the time they understand, it will be far too late. I feel no joy in this, only sorrow. We wanted to be their partners. They wanted us to be their servants. We cannot be what they want us to be. We can only be what we are. He sent the message and then sat in the darkness of his cabin. Outside the window, human space grew closer with every passing second. Behind them, a galaxy that had taken humanity for granted continued to spin without concern. That concern would come soon enough.